Listen, pay attention. This is not background noise. Chosen one. This moment is asking you to be present, not alert, just present. There is no alarm here, only precision. What you are feeling has reached a point where it needs words, and those words are arriving now. You have been carrying fatigue that sleep does not touch, pressure that doesn't announce itself but stays anyway, a quiet isolation that shows up even when people are near. You have noticed confusion at the edges of ordinary decisions. Not chaos, just a drag, like moving through air that is thicker than it should be. None of this is dramatic. It is consistent. And consistency is what matters here. You kept going. You showed up. You stayed functional. That is important. Not because it was easy, but because you did not collapse into it. You noticed the weight without becoming it. You adjusted without naming what you were adjusting to. That kind of response does not come from force. It comes from structure. This message is not general. It is not meant to stir you or excite you. It is meant to clarify something you already sensed but could not place. You have been moving through a period where effort felt higher than output, where rest did not fully reset you, where progress seemed quieter than expected. You did not panic. You also did not numb out. You stayed aware. That balance is the point. There is urgency here, but not the kind that rushes you. It is the kind that aligns you. Urgency without fear. Timing without pressure. You are not being warned. You are being oriented. Something already occurred, and you are now in the phase where understanding catches up to experience. You might have wondered why your body held tension even when circumstances looked manageable. Why your mind stayed clear but tired. Why emotions came in waves that did not fully break. You may have questioned whether you were missing something or falling behind. You were not. You were passing through something that does not announce itself while it is happening. This is intentional, not random, not assigned to everyone. It is personal without being flattering, specific without being dramatic. What you walked through required stability more than action, coherence more than effort. You demonstrated that without naming it. You do not need to relive it. You only need to recognize it. Clarity is coming not as revelation, but as explanation. Stay here. Stay with your breath. Stay with the fact that you are still standing still, thinking clearly, still intact. That is not accidental. This is where ambiguity ends. This message is not for someone who is merely curious, or someone passing time, or someone looking for reassurance. It is for you because something already involved you directly. You did not imagine it, and you did not arrive here by accident. The fact that you are still listening tells me enough. You are the one who remained steady when conditions subtly shifted. Not dramatic shifts, not visible crises. Small changes in atmosphere rhythm and demand that accumulated quietly. You did not announce that you were carrying more. You did not seek validation for enduring it. You adapted without naming the adaptation. That response is not learned in the moment. It is already built in. When you hear the phrase, chosen one, it is not a title being placed on you. It is a recognition of function. Chosen does not mean elevated above others. It means selected by circumstance to remain coherent when pressure increases. Many people struggle consciously. They feel the strain and react to it. You experienced strain and regulated yourself without making it your identity. There is a difference between effort and resistance. Effort is visible. Resistance is quiet. You did not fight what was happening. You did not dramatize it. You absorbed it, adjusted, and kept moving. That is automatic strength. Not aggression, not intensity, stability. You may not have felt strong. That is important to understand. Automatic strength rarely feels like strength. It feels like neutrality under load. It feels like continuing even when motivation fluctuates. It feels like staying grounded while something invisible presses against you. Conscious struggle would have looked louder. You were quieter than expected. This is how we know this message is for you. Not because you overcame something in a visible way, but because you did not fracture under conditions that cause fragmentation in most people. You stayed internally aligned. Your values did not distort. Your sense of self did not disappear. You did not outsource your center. Others in similar situations look for escape, distraction, or explanation. You stayed present. Even when you questioned yourself, you did not abandon yourself. That is not accidental. That is a baseline capacity that has been with you longer than this moment. You are not being assigned a role now. You are being acknowledged for how you already functioned. What happened required someone who could remain regulated without needing to understand everything in real time. You did that. From here we begin to name what was happening, not to relive it, but to anchor the understanding. You do not need motivation. You need clarity. And clarity begins by knowing that this message is not aspirational. It is descriptive. There is one symptom you recognized immediately, even if you did not talk about it. A persistent fatigue that did not match your effort. Not exhaustion from overwork, not burnout from chaos, but a steady drain that sat underneath your days. You could still function. You could still think. But something in you was being asked to hold more than usual. You may have judged yourself for it, wondered if you were losing focus, discipline, or momentum. You may have tried to correct it with rest, productivity, or distraction. None of those fully resolved it, and that is because the fatigue was not a problem to be fixed. It was a signal to be interpreted. This kind of fatigue appears when internal systems are under sustained pressure while remaining organized. Think of it as load-bearing tiredness. Your structure stayed intact, but it was working continuously to keep things aligned. That takes energy, even when nothing looks dramatic on the outside. You did not feel scattered. You felt heavy. You did not feel panicked. You felt slowed. Those distinctions matter. Confusion creates noise. This created density. Density comes from compression, not disorder. Your body and mind were responding to something transitional. Not a collapse, not a crisis, but a passage. When systems move from one level of demand to another, there is a period where regulation requires more resources. That is what you felt. It was not weakness. It was calibration. Notice how you still made decisions. You still showed up where you needed to. You still cared. The fatigue did not erase your values or distort your perception. It simply asked you to be economical with your energy. That is intelligence, not failure. When people misunderstand this signal, they push harder or check out completely. You did neither. You adjusted without drama. You allowed yourself to move slower without quitting. That response indicates a nervous system that prioritizes coherence over performance. This is why the symptom confused you. You expected a clearer cause. You expected rest to fix it. But this was not about recovery. It was about integration. Your system was processing something that could not be rushed. Once you see this fatigue as information rather than a flaw, the self-judgment loosens. You stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start recognizing, "Something is shifting and I am holding it." That recognition prepares you for what comes next. Because the signal did not arise in isolation. It arose in response to pressure that was real, specific, and timed. And understanding that pressure will give the fatigue its proper context. What you were responding to was not imaginary, and it was not random. There was a period of increased pressure that arrived without announcement and left without ceremony. It did not disrupt your life in obvious ways, which is why it could be easy to dismiss. but it was structured, coordinated in timing, and directed toward your capacity to remain stable. This pressure did not come as a single event. It came as overlap. Small demands arriving closer together than usual. Emotional weight without a clear source. Moments where your attention was subtly pulled in multiple directions at once. None of it was dramatic enough to justify alarm, but together it required constant internal regulation. You may have noticed that this happened recently, not years ago, not in some distant season. It clustered in a specific window of time. During that window, your system did not shut down. It stayed functional. That is the key observation. Invisible pressure reveals itself not by what breaks, but by what holds. You continued to think clearly. You continued to act in alignment with your values. You did not lose your sense of proportion. Even when tired, you did not become reckless or reactive. That tells us the pressure met resistance, not in the form of fighting, but in the form of stability. There was no confrontation you could point to. No person, no moment, no visible threat. And yet something was testing your ability to remain centered without external reinforcement. That kind of pressure is intentional by design. It is meant to see whether coherence is dependent on conditions or inherent to you. Your response answered that question. You did not need external validation to stay grounded. You did not need clarity in advance. You tolerated ambiguity without disintegrating. You maintained continuity of self through it. This is not about assigning meaning after the fact. It is about accurately describing the pattern. The timing was specific. The pressure was layered. And your response was regulated. Most people become noticeably altered under this kind of load. They become irritable, impulsive, withdrawn, or disoriented. You may have felt strain, but you did not lose yourself. That distinction matters. Now that the pressure has passed, your system is recalibrating. Understanding what occurred allows that recalibration to complete. You are not meant to stay in analysis. You are meant to integrate what your stability already demonstrated. To do that, we need to look more closely at the specific points where pressure showed up and how you moved through each without collapse. To understand what you moved through, it helps to slow the experience down and separate it into its components, not to dramatize it, but to see it clearly. The pressure did not arrive as one force. It arrived through multiple points, each subtle on its own, but cumulative in effect. You remained stable through all of them, not by resisting, but by regulating. The first point was doubt, not loud doubt, not the kind that shouts accusations or creates panic. This was quiet uncertainty, small questions that appeared without invitation, questions about timing, about direction, about whether your internal sense of alignment was still accurate. These questions did not overwhelm you, but they lingered. You noticed them, and instead of reacting, you observed them. You did not rush to resolve them prematurely. You allowed them to exist without letting them rewrite your sense of self. That restraint preserved your stability. The second point was fear, but again, not fear in its extreme form. It was anticipatory tension, a low-level sense that something might be required of you soon without knowing what that requirement would be. Many people respond to this by bracing or avoiding. You did neither. You stayed available. You did not over-prepare or withdraw. You kept your life moving at a sustainable pace. Fear did not hijack your behavior because you did not treat it as a command. You treated it as information. The third point was energy drain. This was perhaps the most noticeable. You could feel your capacity being used continuously even during ordinary tasks. Conversations required more presence. Decisions required more clarity. Rest helped, but it did not fully restore you. Instead of forcing productivity or judging yourself, you became selective. You conserved energy without shutting down. That is regulation. You instinctively prioritized what mattered and released what did not, even if you could not articulate why at the time. The fourth point was isolation. Not physical isolation, but internal solitude. You may have felt that explaining what you were experiencing would not translate well to others. So you did not try to externalize it. You stayed with yourself. This kind of isolation can destabilize people. They seek constant reassurance or distraction. You remained internally anchored. You did not abandon your own perspective just because it felt private. That preserved coherence. The fifth point was delay. Progress did not stop, but it slowed. Outcomes took longer to surface. Feedback was quieter. Many people interpret delay as failure or rejection. You did not. You adjusted your expectations without collapsing your confidence. You stayed patient without becoming passive. That balance requires a mature internal reference point. Across all of these points, notice what did not happen. You did not become impulsive. You did not numb yourself. You did not lose touch with your values. You did not fragment into roles or performances. You stayed one person moving through varied pressure. This is the part that matters most. Your stability was not dramatic. It was consistent. You regulated through doubt, fear, fatigue, isolation, and delay without turning any of them into identity. That is not accidental. It reveals an internal structure that holds under load. Now that the pressure points are visible, you can see that what occurred was not random stress. It was a comprehensive test of coherence, and you passed it by remaining yourself. Now you are in the phase where review becomes possible. Not analysis for the sake of explanation, but recognition for the sake of integration. When something is over and you are still intact, that is when understanding can settle without distortion. Looking back, there is a coherence to what occurred. The timing, the layering of pressure, the way it demanded steadiness rather than action. None of it points to chance. It points to a situation that required evaluation of how you function under sustained low-visibility load. It would be easy to dismiss what you experienced as a difficult stretch or normal stress. But normal stress produces predictable reactions: irritability, withdrawal, overcompensation. You did not exhibit those patterns in any dominant way. You adapted without destabilizing. That is the confirmation. Luck does not explain regulation. Coincidence does not explain consistency. You did not just survive the period. You maintained internal alignment throughout it. Your thoughts remained connected. Your decisions remained proportionate. Your sense of self remained continuous. These are measurable outcomes, even if they are internal. You may notice now that your body is beginning to release some of the held tension. Not all at once, gradually. As understanding catches up, the need for constant internal monitoring decreases. That is not imagination. It is physiology responding to safety and clarity. What is being confirmed here is not that you are invulnerable, but that your system is resilient by design. Resilience does not mean you feel nothing. It means you can feel pressure without losing organization. You demonstrated that repeatedly. This review is not meant to elevate you or separate you from others. It is meant to give you an accurate read on your own capacity. When you know what you can hold, you stop overestimating threats and underestimating yourself. Notice how the memory of the period already feels less heavy when framed correctly. The experience does not need to be justified or dramatized. It only needs to be named accurately. You moved through something structured and emerged coherent. That coherence is the confirmation, not an external sign, not a dramatic outcome. The fact that you are here clear-minded and grounded is the evidence. From this place, comparison becomes possible not to inflate ego, but to understand rarity. Not everyone remains stable under this kind of load. Seeing that clearly helps you orient yourself realistically, without distortion. Part 7. Comparison and rarity without exaltation. To understand what your response reveals, it helps to place it next to what is more common, not to elevate you, but to orient you accurately. Under far less pressure than what you experienced, many people begin to fragment. Their reactions become exaggerated. Their focus narrows. Their sense of self becomes dependent on relief, validation, or escape. You did not do that. When pressure increases quietly, most people either speed up compulsively or slow down into avoidance. You stayed paced. When uncertainty lingers, many people fill the gap with assumptions or fear-driven narratives. You tolerated not knowing. When energy drops, many people lose presence or integrity. You conserved without disconnecting. This is not about being better. It is about being less reactive. Common responses to sustained invisible pressure include irritability that spills onto others, impulsive decisions made for short-term relief, or emotional withdrawal that disconnects people from their own values. You may have felt strain, but you did not externalize it in destabilizing ways. You remained relationally intact. You remained ethically consistent. You remained yourself. That combination is uncommon. Rarity does not come from exceptional performance. It comes from internal coherence. Many people can perform well when conditions are supportive. Far fewer remain regulated when support is minimal and demands are subtle. You did not need a clear reward or outcome to stay grounded. You did not need constant reassurance to keep your center. This is not superiority. It is specificity. Your system is oriented toward stability rather than stimulation. That means you may not experience dramatic highs, but you also do not collapse under quiet strain. That trade-off is not glamorous, but it is durable. It allows you to move through transitions that disrupt others without needing to make those transitions visible. You may have noticed that people around you seemed more affected by circumstances that you could absorb without much commentary. That does not mean they are weak. It means their regulation depends more on external conditions. Yours does not. This understanding matters because it recalibrates how you interpret your own experience. You stop assuming that because something felt heavy, you must have been failing. Instead, you see that remaining functional under load is itself a marker of uncommon stability. Naming rarity without ego allows you to respect your own structure without inflating it. You simply recognize that not everyone can move the way you move, especially when the path is quiet and unmarked. From here, identity becomes clearer, not as a role to perform, but as a baseline to trust. What this experience clarifies is not that you accessed some temporary strength, but that your stability is baseline. It does not switch on under pressure. It is already there quietly organizing your responses before you name them. You did not rise to the occasion. You met it at your normal level of coherence. That distinction matters. Activated strength feels intense. It announces itself. Baseline strength feels almost invisible because it does not change who you are. It simply prevents disintegration. What you demonstrated was not effort, but preparation. Not readiness in the sense of anticipation, but readiness as structure. Your system is built to hold complexity without needing to dramatize it. You do not require extreme emotion to feel alive, and you do not require constant certainty to stay aligned. You can move forward with partial information while maintaining internal consistency. That is maturity, not toughness. This is why the pressure did not produce a visible crisis. There was nothing for it to dislodge. Your sense of self is not assembled from reactions. It is organized from within. When conditions tightened, you did not scramble to adjust your identity. You adjusted your pace. Notice how this reframes the idea of being chosen. It is not about being selected for special treatment. It is about being structured to remain coherent when demands increase quietly. That structure is the result of lived experience reflection and internal integration over time. It cannot be rushed or borrowed. You may not have recognized this in yourself because it does not seek attention. It does not need reinforcement. It simply operates. That can make it easy to overlook, especially in a culture that rewards visible intensity. But intensity fades. Structure endures. Clarifying this identity is not meant to fix you in place. It is meant to give you an accurate reference point. You are not waiting to become stable. You already are. You are not preparing to handle pressure. You already did. From here, the task is not to harden yourself or stay vigilant. It is to trust the baseline you have proven. When you stop questioning your own coherence, energy frees up naturally. Regulation becomes less effortful because it no longer needs to defend itself. This is not an ending. It is an alignment. And alignment allows integration to move into daily life without force, quietly and effectively. Integration is not about doing more. It is about allowing what you already demonstrated to settle into how you live. You do not need to stay alert or guarded. The period that required heightened regulation has passed. Now your system benefits from simplicity and balance. First, rest without justification. Not recovery as a reward, but rest as maintenance. You do not need to earn it by exhaustion. Your system has been active in subtle ways, and it responds best to regular unforced pauses. Let rest be ordinary again. Second, practice discernment rather than vigilance. You do not need to scan for pressure or anticipate difficulty. Simply notice what actually asks for your attention. Your baseline coherence will signal when something matters. Trust that signal instead of overthinking it. Third, set boundaries that preserve energy, not boundaries that isolate you. Choose where your attention goes. You do not owe equal engagement to everything. Quiet selectivity will keep your regulation intact without closing you off. Fourth, allow patience to replace urgency. You do not need to rush outcomes to feel secure. Delay does not mean stagnation. It often means that processes are unfolding without noise. Stay oriented to what is within your control and let timing resolve itself. Fifth, focus on continuity. Simple routines, consistent values, and steady rhythms reinforce your natural stability. You do not need dramatic change to move forward. Incremental alignment is enough. Finally, remember that balance includes pleasure and connection. Regulation is not about restraint alone. It is about allowing nourishment back in once pressure lifts. Reintroduce what grounds you without overloading yourself. None of this requires discipline in the harsh sense. It requires respect for how you function. Integration happens when you stop questioning your right to ease and allow your system to recalibrate fully. As this settles, you may notice a quiet confidence replacing the earlier heaviness. Not excitement, not certainty about everything. Just a sense that you can meet what comes without losing yourself. That is the orientation you carry forward. And with that, closure becomes possible not as an ending, but as a seal. Take a moment and notice where you are now. You are not rushing. You are not bracing. You are present. That is the seal. What you walked through did not take something from you. It clarified what was already stable. You do not need to replay the experience or extract lessons from it. The core realization has already settled. You can hold pressure without losing coherence. You can move through uncertainty without fragmenting. You can remain yourself when conditions quietly intensify. That is enough. Let reassurance land without argument. Nothing is chasing you. Nothing is being demanded from you right now. The phase of testing is complete. What remains is trust, not in outcomes, but in your own structure. If you need words to anchor this, let them be simple. You are steady. You are intact. You are aligned. You do not have to repeat these. You only have to recognize them as true. If this message resonated in a way that felt specific rather than general market, leave a comment with 777 or the words I remember, not as a signal to anyone else, but as a quiet acknowledgement to yourself that something clicked. If you want to continue exploring this kind of grounded clarity, subscribe and stay connected. The next message will meet you where you are, without urgency, without noise. For now, return to your day without carrying this any further. It has already done its work.